Okay, this is Algebra 2, Chapter 5, Unit 4, Part 2. Now we're going to look at functions with four terms. So one of the rules with functions with four terms is we want to use grouping. We want to make sure we group. Okay, so here is a little table that shows us the steps and examples that coordinate with the steps. So we have first to group the first two terms together and the last two. So here's our example. We have x cubed plus x squared minus 4x minus 4. So we want to group the first two and the last two together. So we go ahead and we draw a line between the first two and the last two terms. Make sure you include this negative sign with the 4x. Okay? Step 2, factor the greatest common factor for each group. So with this x cubed plus x squared, we see that x is a common factor or a common variable between both terms. And the least I can do, the most I can take out is x squared. So with the first group, I'm going to go ahead and factor out x squared. When I take x cubed divided by x squared, I get x, and x squared divided by x, I get a positive 1. Next, I have negative 4x and negative 4. I want to go ahead and take out the greatest common factor in this grouping as well. So both have a negative 4 in them, so I'm going to go ahead and factor out a negative 4. When I take negative 4x divided by negative 4, I'm left with x, and when I take negative 4 divided by negative 4, I get positive 1. Step 3, factor the common binomial. So I'm going to go ahead and I have this x squared here and this negative 4 here. I'm going to go ahead and group those two together, okay? And then these two are the same. I have an x plus 1, and an x plus 1. So I have x squared minus 4 times x plus 1. And now I want to look to see if there's anything I can factor, any perfect squares or perfect cubes. So I notice that this one, this x squared minus 4, they're both perfect squares, so I can go ahead and I can factor this even further. So, well, I'm looking at what factors of negative 4 that when added together equals 0, because I don't have that x term or that b value here. So I know that 2 and negative 2, when multiplied together, I get negative 4, but when added together, they cancel each other out. So that is what it looks like factored. That would be the answer. Now let's look at some examples. Here's number 21. We have x cubed minus x squared plus 9x minus 9. First, I want to go ahead and I want to group these together. I want to group the first two terms and the last two terms together. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line between both terms. Next, I'm going to look at the first grouping, this x cubed minus x squared, and factor out the greatest common factor. In this case, the greatest common factor is x squared. Well, then I look at the second one, and 9x minus 9, and see what I can factor out. I can factor out a 9 from both of those. So I take my x squared, and I take x cubed minus x squared, divide that by x squared, and I am left with x minus 1. And then I factor out a 9 in the other grouping, and when I factor out a 9, I get x minus 1 as well. I go ahead and I group those together, so x squared and 9x, 9 equals x squared plus 9 and x minus 1. Now, I would like you to try numbers 22 through 24 on your own. Go ahead and pause the video while you try those problems. Here are the answers to numbers 22 through 24. Now, try homework number 4 on your own. And then once you feel ready and complete, go ahead and move on to Unit 5.